I'm Wendy Grolnick, and I'm a professor here at Clark University. So I started my research career actually studying parent-child attachment. And then I got interested in a group that was working at the University of Rochester that was studying motivation. And one of the interesting things they were finding is that if you pay people for doing something that they were doing because they love to do it, it would change their motivation such that after they weren't getting the rewards anymore, they would do it less. So it's kind of like you've changed their orientation to doing the task. Something that you're doing for fun, now you're doing because of the reward. And what the group was finding is that had to do with people's need for autonomy. People need to feel like they're doing things because they want to and not because they're being pushed or pressured. And so at that point I thought, well, this would be an interesting thing to study in parents, and that was what my research was about. Were there individual differences in how much parents pushed and pressured their children and motivated them by rewards versus not doing those sorts of things? And the beginning studies that I did were actually with very young children, with babies and their moms, 12-month-olds, and I watched them interacting around a task. Some moms would be just sitting there sort of available in case their children needed some help, and other parents were really very directive and do it this way and do it that way and move their hands and solve the problems for them. And we found that the children of the moms who were more controlling and pressuring, when they had an opportunity to do tasks on their own, they were less motivated to persist and they gave up more easily. So we took that work really seriously and started studying that process of how much parents were what we called autonomy supportive, sort of supporting their children, leading the way, allowing them to solve problems and supporting them in that, giving them choices, versus more controlling or pressuring or pushing them. And found that made a big difference. It made a difference in terms of children's own school regulation. So when parents were more controlling, kids were less likely to take responsibility for their work and to regulate their own school behavior, their homework, their schoolwork, and so forth. So that made a difference there. So I was doing that work for a while, and at that time I didn't have children of my own, but somewhere along the way there I had my children. And when I did those studies with the moms and the children, I always thought, well, I'd never do that. I'd never push my kids like that. I'd never move their hands and so forth. But when I had my own children, I found that I felt a lot of pressure to make sure my kids were doing things right. When they was helping them with their homework, I wanted to kind of take the pencil out of their hand and do it right. And I wanted them to make sure that they were socially in the right groups and things like that. And most of the time I didn't act on that, but I felt that pressure. And so I began to think, well, what makes parents controlling? What makes them pressure their children in that way? And I looked to the literature, and there were only really pathological models that said that parents who are narcissistic push their children and don't allow them to be human beings and things like that. And I thought, well, no, there's something else going on there. And so we began to study what makes parents controlling, bringing parents in the lab, looking at their own perceptions. And we found, for example, that when parents felt like their children had to meet some sort of standard, they were much more likely to pressure and push their kids. Or when they felt like the opportunities for their children were scarce, they would be more likely to push them. And unfortunately, that pushing backfires. But our notion was that parents are sort of biologically predisposed to make sure their children are competitive and do really well. And if you combine that with the incredible pressure today and competition that children are under and parents are under to have their children succeed, together that makes for a situation where parents feel very pressured to have their children succeed and put that pressure down onto their children, and that unfortunately backfires. So importantly, what we find and what's important is that parents know that the only thing that can really make their children succeed, whether it's in sports or whether it's in school, is the passion that the children have, the interest that the children have. And our goal is to nurture that rather than to try to pressure and push our children into doing whatever it is they're doing, and to for parents kind of to be to the antidote to that pressure by using more autonomy supportive techniques rather than being part of the pressure problem.